Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/new music industry. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player.
You're listening to the New Music Industry with David Andrew Weaver.
Today I'm chatting with founder and CEO of Soundwhale, Ameen Abdulla. How are you today, Ameen?
I'm doing well. Thanks for setting this up.
Yeah.
Look forward to this. Yeah.
Me too. You know, your story is fascinating to me because I've been working hard to become a professional musician for over a decade when suddenly I got drawn into the world of network marketing. I didn't stay in network marketing, but I caught the entrepreneurship bug and have been passionate about it ever since. You also followed an unlikely path in the sense that you grew up playing sweaty clubs and punk bands, but then you turned around and got a business degree with a focus in computer technology, and then you moved into audio engineering. Would love for you to talk about how that transition happened.
Well, my mother and father are from India, so rather than going into medicine, we compromised on business.
I see.
So that, but like in reality, I think it was a good move just to actually make something serious of it. If you're gonna follow your passion and actually do something with it, I think it's good to have like a full knowledge of the industry and business. And I think it also allows you to kind of see where things are going. And if you want to do something seriously and professionally and actually make money at it, like combine your passion with your job, I think it's important to get a little bit more of a well-rounded, case. And I'm sure you went through the same thing, just kind of getting the whole overview of combining music with business and seeing the trend of where it's going to go and stuff. So for me, like it was a little bit like I'm getting this degree in business, but as soon as I'm done, I'm going to go to audio school, right? That's what I'm thinking the whole time because that's what I wanted to do. And then I worked because I got a business degree with a focus in computer information systems. So in which I didn't pay attention in my classes at all. So after I graduated, the economy was pretty bad. And like, what am I going to do? So I ended up actually getting a job working. It was actually with AmeriCorps. It was like a volunteer job. And that was actually working with small businesses and helping them with their IT needs, doing like web pages and like Excel spreadsheets, just doing databases for them. And kind of like, I kind of enjoyed it. So at that point, I branched off and worked with one of the clients that came to the workshop for the volunteer stuff. And this lady, she was running this clothing factory in the south side of Chicago. And she made coveralls and for the Navy in the military. So she would get being African-American and a female, she would get all kinds of grants from the government. So she was really busy. Or not, I don't want to say she was busy, but she was getting a lot of work, but didn't have a way to automate her productions. So I ended up working in her factory for a couple of years and got kind of good at coding and making all these automated systems and things like that. It was really an interesting job. And finally, she stopped, paying me. So I left, but ended up going to audio school. But I had this kind of way to, I really like coding and I like the logic behind it. And that's kind of what, brought this, full circle back. But I'll just tell you, after that experience, I moved to Minneapolis and went to audio school. And I'm thinking, okay, what do I like? What do I really like? I like electronic music and I like post-production. Essentially, they're kind of the same thing. You have to be really good at editing, really good at frequencies, shaping sounds and things like that. So I thought, okay, this is one avenue that I could take going into post where I can actually justify buying all this gear and playing electronic music. And a lot of musicians do the same thing. They'll get a job in post just so they can support their habit, because it's really tough to to make it in music unless you're touring all the time. And I mean, I think that's more of an example now than even back then, where people were still somewhat getting some money from record sales. But so after a while, I mean, I worked in post for, gosh, like 16, 17 years now. And I loved the challenge behind it and the tight deadlines and multitasking, servicing clients. Like that was all super challenging for me, and I liked it. Still, sound design is like, it's a true art, and I think only a very few amount of people do it really, really well. You know, you can just kind of wing it, throw some sound effects things, shape them in EQ and stuff, but it's truly an art. So that kind of kept me interested in getting better at that. And then, you know, in the evenings I would like play my synthesizer and record bands and make records and stuff like that. So everything was great, right? Everything's working good. I have a good job. I can make music. But after a while, it was just kind of getting to a point where, okay, I want to do this with other people. I have so many people all over the world that I want to collaborate with. In fact, even from a work standpoint, like we have a lot of clients all over the place. We're in Minneapolis, or I was in Minneapolis, and I have clients on either coast, like New York and LA. And as much as they wanted to work with me, it's much more comfortable to go into a local studio in the same room and get your mix right in front of you and tell somebody to stop when it's bad, turn this up, turn this down. Like people are used to that, and they don't want to be able to compromise, you know, even like a couple of seconds of lag to where you can hear them saying, turn this up, turn this down. That gets really frustrating. So between trying to find some kind of solution that works in the studio and, you know, losing business, I just said, I'm going to do this myself. Because I've had this idea for a while, like maybe 2010 or 11, but the tech just wasn't there. I mean, the connection speeds were still slow. There was still a lot of interference with Wi-Fi. And I mean, the Wi-Fi definitely wasn't there at that point. So I decided to revisit that couple of years ago, like 2015. And then I got introduced to a person in New York from a friend of mine and a client, like who was a consultant for me as well. It's kind of a weird relationship, but he was in media tech, and I was doing like recording voiceovers and things like that for him. And he's like, "Hey man, I think we can find somebody to code this project for you." And it was a guy in New York. His name's Stan, actually. He's a really good friend of mine now. And he just didn't say no to anything. So maybe if he said no, I wouldn't be here with this product. But it's a difficult project to handle. I mean, we took it to MIT and Stanford and stuff, and they said it's just too innovative, meaning like we can't guarantee results with something like this.
Yeah.
And so Stan's like, yeah, I'll do it. He's a Ukrainian man, and he took on the project and ended up like getting some developers from Kiev, and then I ended up working with them directly after, you know, with a project like this. I mean, you have to understand, like it's, and the hardest thing I learned is that you can't assume people know what's in your head, especially if you're coming from such a niche workflow, like with music production or post-production. So I'm just thinking the first day of meeting these guys and having this huge business plan and workflow and stuff, they're going to understand it. But no, man, it takes years if they understand it at all. So I eventually had to go over there to Kiev, and I stayed there almost 2 years working with these developers and making sure it actually worked, and working with them doing tests every day. And so it was just a really lucky position I could be in to quit my job and kind of live off my savings and borrow money and try to develop this stuff. And it ended up I feel like I was lucky in a lot of ways, but I think the main thing was just persistence and not leaving until I got what I wanted. But I certainly got a taste of the possibility that it can actually work. And that's when I went over there, because you can kind of see, okay, give me some kind of proof of concept. So the audio streaming was working the synchronizing machines over the network was working, and the video streaming was working. And those are the three main components of Soundwhale. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I kind of branched off in a little background and history there.
That's a great overview, I think,
I did.
of the things we're going to cover in this interview.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just by way of comment, like something you mentioned about that connection between music and performing and entrepreneurship. When I started exploring that, I was starting to explore the practical side of what it would mean to be someone who's passionate about music, but someone who also wanted to generate cash flow and profit and revenue, and while serving the world and adding value to a specific audience. What I started doing, because I think there were people beginning to talk about music and entrepreneurship as kind of two separate things at that time in 2011, but no one had quite made the leap to music entrepreneurship, which is where
Right.
I went, and that's of course the namesake of my website as well.
Yeah.
I think I ended up benefiting a lot of people just because I started talking about the connection, not totally understanding where it was going to go or how it could be packaged and sold just yet. But
Well, I think that those conversations are what actually kind of made it go in the direction it did. People had to talk about it and discuss it because it was so unknown at that point.
yeah,
I mean, nobody knew how to reconcile what happened after the digital age kicked in, when record sales just plummeted and musicians aren't making any money. And it's, actually, if you look at the history of it, and I'm sure you know this much better than I do, but the whole history of music, musicians never made much money historically. There was just a golden era where people were really kicking it up and making record sales, and for about, I don't know, 60 years or something, after the Beatles, and then now it's just kind of back to normal, I think, and people are actually using the means of the web for actual exposure and marketing and stuff like that a lot easier than they did. So it kind of shifted, but I think people are working hard again and touring and doing it like that. But I think without the conversation and without, really digging into it would have completely failed.
those are great points. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And you hinted at this already about some of the challenges that came up, but today people often talk about the fact that remote studio collaboration is easier than ever, but there have been some technical and technological challenges to making this work. So talk about that.
Well, I think the first point, it's easier than ever. It's true and not true. I think it's really true because there's just so many ways to do it. I mean, for years now, I've even been using Skype to connect a feed from my studio into a Skype channel, calling somebody on Skype on a good connection, and they're listening to my feed from my Pro Tools mix or whatever, like that, from two machines. But it wasn't too convenient. There were some dropouts and things like that. And that's kind of the way we hack it together. But there's also some other software that does this, that's been on the market for a while. I think one mistake people did was try to sell jamming software, because nobody's ever going to be happy with that. I think defying the laws of physics are not in any software's capabilities at this point. So that was a mistake. But then there's also collaborative softwares where you can just connect and stream with one another, but there are issues with networking. There are issues with delays. There are issues with jitter, sample rates. So there's a lot of things. I feel like nobody sat down and did a lot of the use cases that people do on a day-to-day level. And I'm talking from music production to post-production, because you'll see a lot of stuff that's geared maybe towards post, or something geared towards music. Actually, not so much towards post, and we'll get into that in a minute, but more music production stuff where I think people are creating editors. There's a couple of softwares out there. Can't remember the name, but there's an editing software, where it pretty much competes with Pro Tools or Logic. And you can connect with somebody else and stream and do cloud and stuff like that. But it's too big, man. It's too beefy. There's too much CPU issues involved. And by the time the audio stream gets over, there's a lot of jitter. And I'm sitting here and editing something where I could have just used Pro Tools to do the edit. You can use whatever you like and actually just have something just to stream. So that's what I wanted to do, was have just something really simple that has a very solid purpose of streaming audio between one another, but also be able to cover all of the use cases you could in a studio. And like, coming from music and post background, I wanted to be able to cover those that ground. And if you look at look at DAWs, what do you use, by the way? Are you a Pro Tools user or Logic, or?
Surprisingly, I use something that much more community uses, but I use Traction.
Oh my God, I don't even know what is Traction.
It was originally developed by Mackie, so it was bundled with some of their hardware, and then in time it became its own thing. But what I like about it is just the workflow. I just find it so fast and easy to use, whereas some of these other DAWs are so clunky and difficult to learn. It takes time.
Absolutely.
But I had a friend who was wanting to learn Pro Tools at about the same time, so we both delved into it in that space, and I still ended up going in the direction of Traction.
Really, that's interesting. This is awesome, by the way, because I hear so many things. I don't hear so much about Traction. Now I remember what you're saying, because they packaged this, I think, with some of their control surfaces too.
Yes.
Back in the day, and I used to have one of them, like the Mackie HUI protocol. That automated fader board or whatever, with the scrub wheel. I think this came with that. But I never used the software because I was using Pro Tools. But that's really good to hear that you're still on it. And do they update it? Do you know, or is it like a?
They do. They're up to Traction 7 now. So I think Mackie kind of dropped off around Traction 3, and then nothing happened for quite a while. And then for a while it was like, new version every year.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's my point exactly. Like, everyone's going to have their own taste to what they like. And if I were to develop something that competed with their workflow, for example, if I made a DAW with all this editing and plugins and all, a different, has like maybe a conflicting slightly workflow, people wouldn't like it. You can't really mess with somebody's workflow, especially when they're doing something creative. And I think that's really important to keep that kind of a thing. So what I wanted to do was build somewhat of a bridge and have users use what they like and what they're used to, and then connect it like a bridge through Soundwhale, stream it to the other side. So you could essentially be using, and a lot of people use like this, like Traction or Pro Tools or whatever you use, and just have Soundwhale in the background streaming your stuff while you're still in your interface. So that was what was really appealing to myself, even because I'm pretty even if I have a different mouse, I will seem extremely slow with Pro Tools. Like, I won't know where I'm going. So I actually bring my own mouse to studios that I freelance, and people get so much shit for that. They're like, "Oh, you use the Mighty Mouse? That's outdated. Use the trackball." I'm like, "No, man. I like my Mighty Mouse." So it's really funny if I'm picking up a gig freelancing somewhere that I pulled this mouse out of my pocket. But in that way, it has sense. Like, you're used to your own workflow, and you don't want to dissect that or take it apart and learn something else, especially when you want to pick something up and you're feeling creative in that moment. So the way it works is, like, in Traction, you can choose an audio interface in Traction, right? You can like select whatever you're using.
Absolutely,
I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So, and is it Soundwhale's only for Mac? Are you a Mac user?
I use both Mac and PC, so I might be a little bit unusual that way.
No, that's awesome. So in your in Traction, you would choose like Soundwhale for your audio interface, and then in Soundwhale itself, Traction's going to pop up in your sources, and then you can choose what source you want to send to the other person, and then call them, and then that's it.
Wow.
So it's pretty intuitive, pretty simple in that way. It looks like I wish I could have I got so busy. I was thinking of sending it to you and just so you can mess around with it. I didn't even know you were a musician until like an
Ah.
hour ago. So
I know it happens like that these days, right? I think it used to be that, you would spend weeks or days poring over an interview on either side, right? You research the
yeah,
other person
yeah,
and go, what
I
else can I
know.
learn about them?
Oh man,
And
I
then
know.
these days it's just like, oh yeah, I looked on my computer half an hour before or whatever.
Totally, I know. I'm sorry, man. I feel bad
uh,
now because it's
no,
like,
not at all.
and even for doing it for podcasts, like we talked earlier, you can actually just call somebody in that way. If you have an external mic, you would choose it as your source. You could do it inside. But the thing is, like, you see the person. If you want, you can use the talkback. You can type message, kind of like Skype, I guess.
Hmm.
And then additionally, you can record the signal that you have and then the signal that's coming in as well, and just do it as a stereo track. And when you import it into, I guess, Traction, you can see the split and just split it off. And if you want to EQ it or whatever, you can do it like that too. But
Sounds very simple to use. That's awesome.
mhm.
Yeah, really would have been cool to experiment, but
Yeah,
perhaps another time. And
yeah.
to your point too, like I've done my fair share of Skype interviews that unfortunately went sideways. I can maybe count on one hand the number of times that's happened, but even then, it's like some of those people aren't going to come back and do a full
No,
interview with me because they can't. And so it's like
exactly.
disappointing, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What happened? Just the connection, like, got screwed up, or
There was a period where that was happening, and in which case we
yeah.
just rescheduled. But the the recording, whatever for whatever reason, the audio itself was like corrupt. So it was either
Oh,
skipping, or the voices were, there was a delay between the voices, and suddenly they're overlapping in different parts. So it
oh
just made
man.
it completely unusable.
Yeah, yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
That happens a lot with Skype, for sure, man.
it does,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah.
So, I do rely a little bit on the press releases I'm sent for information
Mhm,
on my guests, but, you even
mhm.
talk about losing clients because of how poorly remote collaboration was working. So that must have
Yeah.
been frustrating. Well, how did that make you
Oh
feel?
yeah. Frustrated and motivated completely. I mean,
Hmm.
it was because this was in my mind for a long time, and that just did it for me. I had a client in Minneapolis that had offices in LA and studios in LA. It's a production company, and they liked me, they liked our team, and they wanted to give us all the mixes. But unfortunately, the LA team's like, all right. Or, I mean, the LA team said, let's do something and work with these guys, figure out a remote solution. And we tried a lot of stuff, man, like so many things over a couple of weeks. It was a really slow time at the studio. So this was the time to actually take everything apart and even install a bunch of different hardware boxes, dedicated hardware boxes. Um, and this was on like consumer level stuff, because there's companies like when we were just at IBC even, and there have been companies around for a long time that have extremely expensive solutions like that news stations and broadcast stations use that are pretty good, for streaming audio and video. But they're locked and dedicated like hardware lines. Like I don't even know how they work, but it's really, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get something like this, to stream. And for consumer level, it was a few $1,000, but still, it just didn't work because of the delays, the network difficulties, because you have to get around firewalls and things like that.
Hmm.
And then the other thing was the quality was just too compressed, and that kind of compression, it just didn't. I mean, there was really no point in having a mix when a lot of those high frequencies are compressed like that. It just didn't. We're an audio studio. We shouldn't have to compromise the sound, even if somebody's not listening in the best environment. It's something they need to hear on headphones, or I mean, a lot of our production companies even have a decent room just for monitoring inside of their studio, like where they in their edit suites and stuff, and it just didn't work too well. And then the talkback situation was pretty bad too, because the talkback would work on a different pace as the actual stream. So you can imagine that getting a little confusing, because if somebody is saying stop and you don't know, like, or they're talking about something, but you don't know. There's so much information going on in the span of a few seconds. You don't know what they're talking about, and you ask them again, was it this part? Was it this part? Like stuff like that. So it was just not an easy way to find a solution, and so I think within a few months I decided, and I think I had already started developing Soundwhale at this point, just on a smaller scale. And then I decided to kick it up a notch when this happened. So I left my job within, I think, 6 months, and, maybe thought I could take 3 months off to see what would happen. And then like a month later, I just put in my leave because I knew I needed to spend some time there and figure this out. Because this is not an easy solution. And I think it's a combination of technology and also practicality, like what's actually important in a session and what you have to focus on. And then the actual workflow of a session too. Okay, I've recorded these takes. Now, how do I organize them? Right? I'm recording like literally hundreds of takes of this voiceover. What do I do if I don't have Pro Tools? If I'm like an ad agency or production company, how do I manage these takes? So that's something that we offer as well. Like if you're not a Pro Tools user, you don't have much audio knowledge, you can actually record voiceovers directly, because a very high percentage of voiceover talent have pretty decent setups in their place. They just can't invite clients to them. So that kind of bridges that gap of, okay, let the client directly work with that person from Soundwhale, something like that. So it took a while to document and just go through everything, but everything was already in my head. It's just getting it out and getting it to the developers took a little while, but yeah, so I don't know if I answered your question again. I branch off, so please hone me in if I tend to do that.
No, that's great. And some of those frustrations are basically what led to the development of Soundwhale. And, it was kind of like a scratching your own itch kind of thing, but I'm sure you saw that it was going to prove useful for a lot of different people, which I imagine is why you created it. I guess a couple of things that I found interesting. This was sort of not entirely clear in the press release, but it seemed to indicate that you're not using the cloud.
No.
Interesting. Why is that?
And that's the question I got at the conference a lot too. And then I explained it, and people were like, yeah, actually some people came to me because I'm not using the cloud.
Huh.
Because if you think about it, if you're not streaming, right, and you're using the cloud is awesome. Like, I personally love it. I think it's super convenient. And it works well for many applications, video reviews, like documents, even audio stuff. But imagine this, like you're in the cloud, you're working on the same like Pro Tools session or whatever. You record something and instantly you can save it and it pops into the other user's session. That's awesome. You can work on the same thing. You don't have to worry about bandwidth of streaming and stuff like that. It's super efficient, really good. But for applications like direction, communicating, voiceovers, you got to wait for the file before you can hear it or hear a mistake in it. Or you like, for example, if a voiceover is recording something, they pop it in. I might be monitoring over the phone, but that kind of defeats the purpose also. I want to hear it in high quality. So once they hit save, it pops into your session, and I have to wait for them to do their sentence. I want them to stop in the moment and capture that like feeling, because humans will always work on muscle memory. So if you're working with a voiceover artist and they're kind of in this groove, right? After you give them a bunch of direction, you have to tell them stop at the right moment and be able to, capture that instead of wait for a file, essentially. So that was the reasoning behind that. Although what we do is if you do record a take, we can pop it into another Soundwhale user's session instantly as well. So that cloud like the cloud functionality without actually saving stuff in the cloud is still there, like peer to peer though. Does that make sense? Does that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
And I guess the other thing that the press release indicated was that this is basically the beta launch. I imagine there's still a lot of testing going into it.
There's a lot of testing. There's been testing since, I mean, I've been in beta since March.
Right.
So this is the launch, but I think what people don't tell you is everything is in beta.
I see.
Everything is constantly in beta. Apple operating systems, Pro Tools, everything. Because, you're going to find something like I had, I think, 200 plus testers. And, all those issues were addressed. Some were not going to address just because it wasn't going in the direction we wanted to go. But we went through and, kind of got through everything and went over it with a comb and just fixed everything. But I think there's going to be even more cases where, okay, what I worry about is you press a combination of these 6 buttons and something crazy is going to happen, like stuff like that. It's just, you just got to wait for it and see what happens. But as far as our use cases, I mean, we can easily have a mix remotely without any crashes. So, I mean, you have to cut it off at some point. But I think, to your point, like, I think every software is really in beta.
Yeah.
To a certain point,
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. Nothing is like 100% stable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. What's the greatest challenge you've overcome as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, this is a crazy question because it's like, first of all, you're like, am I an entrepreneur? How did I get into this situation? But I guess over like the last couple of years, I took it upon myself to kind of go down this road. And for me, the challenge is not, I mean, okay, the tech was certainly challenging. Working with the developers and getting what I wanted was certainly challenging, but it's really, being able to solve a need, and that need usually comes from us first. Usually we have this idea because it pertains to us, right? But being able to solve something that pertains to a lot of people was not easy because there's so many use cases and so many things. People want to see so many different things. And still, like, that's ongoing. I don't think that challenge has yet overcome. That's why it's still fresh in my mind, because each time you go to a conference too, it's like, okay, we have this need and we want to use this for like live news stations and things like that. And it's like, well, there's different applications for that. You should get hardware boxes that are dedicated, like do the really expensive solution because you don't want to risk something, right? So being able to solve like a real world need and still, I don't know, it's a really good question. That's why I'm like thinking out loud as we're talking. But I think being able to have a practical solution to a need still applying after you've gone through all this tech and all this development, like your original idea, is it still intact? And a lot of times, like the idea, from what I hear and what I understand talking to other entrepreneurs in tech, like it changes quite a bit from their original idea to where they started, and mine hasn't changed at all. So that was something I had to really fight for and stay, because there were so many opportunities to compromise and release early, but the development took a really long time. And having that patience to sit there in Ukraine was something, I think. Yeah. Like being able to make sure that it's exactly how you want it.
And what would you say is the biggest victory you've experienced as an entrepreneur?
I mean, probably surviving Ukraine. Like getting out of there, and that was really tough on me. I mean, because it's at a point where the project manager is telling you this will be done next month, but that's not true because you're working with them directly. So it was just kind of a mess of a situation, and actually staying there long enough and coming out. It's all related, I think. That was the biggest victory for me, like actually completing what I set out to do. It wasn't too easy for me, and it was just a little, I mean, I sacrificed a lot of, when your life just completely just changes and it's forced to change when you don't expect it. And you the things that were important to you before just aren't as important anymore, I think.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So it wasn't really a sacrifice, but it was more like, okay, a shift and a focus, and like, okay, I'm not going to go to the, meet up with friends. It's like a silly thing, but it's like a real focus and almost like self-punishment until you're finished.
Self-punishment.
Yeah. So, and I didn't have my instruments with me. I didn't have my synths or my guitars or anything like that. So that was really tough, because usually after a long day, like I'll just start writing music or composing something, or like working on something creative, just to take myself out of it. And not having that was kind of something, kind of strange for that amount of time. And so it almost forces that creative hunger in a different direction, I think. And it's like overworked, but still like in a good way.
Absolutely. I know exactly where you're coming from, and I would say I'm probably going through one of those transitions right now as I look to move out to BC and
man,
begin a new life. So
yeah, well, it's I hope something really good comes of it.
Yeah, thank you.
It sounds like yeah.
Oh, I'm sure it will. Are there any books or other resources that have helped you on your journey?
I think as far as books, I mean, I've been kind of, again, like kind of removing, when I read, I want to remove myself a little bit. Yeah, there's like, entrepreneurial books and stuff, but there's, I've been reading The Mysticism of Sound and Music, and that's just so, have you heard of this book? It's like Hazrat Inayat Khan. It's like a Sufi book, like kind of a mystic religion, music, sound, evolution type thing, where it's so abstract and some parts are really difficult to read, but it really brings you out of your reality. And it's like, what's really important? Where does sound come from? What is the nature of sound? How does it influence us? What are the implications? And for me, that really hits home. I mean, and this is more of like, I guess not really the entrepreneurial success, but it's, kind of as a person, as a musician. So I mean, I like weird shit like that. So I don't know if it's, as far as books, but and I read quite a bit on, obviously, you're reading articles constantly, like how things are working and stuff, and a lot of technical manuals, a lot of stuff on like how to managing teams and stuff like that. But it's just been a lot of work. So reading time has been definitely cut more than I like it to be. But it's really important to, I think, just kind of lose yourself in a book. It's not, I don't want to read so much about work and that other kind of stuff.
Yeah. Sounds like it's kind of a relaxation time for you.
Yeah.
Which is also important.
Absolutely.
Every entrepreneur needs to do that.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I recently got an iPad along with an Apple Pencil, and as a kid, I used to draw a lot, and it's not something I've done much in recent years. But then with the Apple Pencil, it made me want to just try things out and explore things. So I was up till like 1:30 last night, just messing around with it. And
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was. It was a very zen time for me. So
yeah. What did you draw?
Well, first, I'm because I grew up in Japan, I'm used to drawing like anime style stuff. So that's one of the things I was doing. And then I did some like abstract mountains, and then I just did like a tree in the field kind of thing. So
oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not, you painted my picture. I'm in Japan next month, and yeah, we're actually doing Interbi in Chiba. So we're super pumped about that.
Chiba,
and
yes.
Like, yeah, you kind of drew what I'm looking forward to. Where did you live in Japan? Where were you?
It's a city called Takarazuka, and it's in between Kobe and Osaka. And it's the birthplace of Osamu Tezuka, who created Astro Boy and many, many, many other famous characters. And it's also home to what they call the Kageki, which is female only theater. So it's like the opposite of Shakespeare, because in Shakespearean time it was always men or boys playing the parts. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Crazy. How long did you live there?
8.5 years.
Wow. And were you born there, or did you? live there after, like when you were younger?
Yeah, I was not born there. I was born in Camrose, and then we moved when I was like 5, turning 6. My sister was born in Kyushu, Fukuoka, actually. But
Oh,
yeah, so I mean, a
wow.
really a huge part of my upbringing. Yeah.
Yeah, those are those formative years, man.
Oh yeah, big
You
time,
know,
big
that's
time.
crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So that kind of came back to you when you picked up the pencil, huh?
Yeah, yeah, it did.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. It was
Wow.
unexpected, but I felt like I could, mix and match the pencil, the pen, and the marker, and get some effects I couldn't get before. So I would not have guessed that.
Yeah.
I could be that exact with
Yeah.
a tablet.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a lot of people doing that actually. The people at the booths next to us were, I mean, there were times where there's like no traffic at all, like after lunch, people are just like on their iPads. And this girl next to us had the iPad and was drawing. She's like a graphic artist or whatever. I was like, wow, that looks it was so good. It was so precise.
Yeah,
I was shocked by it. It looked awesome.
yeah, exactly. I'm very surprised, but who knows? I mean, I have a tendency to turn all of that into like business or money making. I'm gonna try not to do that with this and just kind of make it my
Yeah.
personal
No.
for fun hobby. But
Yeah. Some things need to be left.
I really do think so. That was my past tendency. I think I'm too tired
Yeah.
for that at this point.
Totally.
Too burnt
No, I
out.
feel you, man. Yeah.
Yeah. This has been a great conversation. Thanks so much for your time and generosity. I mean, is there anything else I should have asked?
No, you covered it pretty much, man. I mean,
Okay.
I think I probably told you more than what you asked, but it was definitely a fun conversation for me too. So thank you for that.
It was, and I'm glad it was enjoyable. I'm currently working on something for you called the Music Entrepreneur Code. There will be more details to follow, but for now, you can go to musicentrepreneurhq.com/code to learn more and to get on the waiting list. That's musicentrepreneurhq.com/code. Thank you for listening. Music in this episode was brought to you by Brian Young. Wherever you're listening to this right now, please consider leaving a 5-star review and comment to help us get the word out about the podcast.